get a faster walkthrough on this blink healer setup. So we're going to be going over SPC Pillager on a blade. Pillager is generally put on the Nightblade because the Nightblade has passives that give them faster ult regen, and Pillager puts out bigger procs based on the amount of ult that you're putting out at a time, so pairs really well with this class. Per ult spent on your end, the group will get ult regen back. Be aware of the radius on this proc. It's a 12-meter radius in order for the group to benefit on the proc. So when you put out your ultimate, which is how this set procs, is by you putting out your ultimate, make sure that you're within a 12-meter radius of ideally everyone in the group. If you put it out and somebody is out, they are not reaping the benefits, so be mindful of that. In order to get the max benefit from this, you need to be putting out a 400 ult. That's the magic number. Since this procs with an ultimate, it only needs to be put on one bar, so this is the one that I wear on my back bar. SPC has a 5-second cooldown. You need to put out an overheal every 5 seconds, which can apply if you already have HOTS ticking, so you just need to make sure that this remains the constant 5-piece, so this goes on your body. Pillager will be on your back bar and your jewels. For our traits and the rest of our pieces, front bar is going to be a master resto. Perfected gives you extra max mag. It's a really nice extra selfish bonus for you to have. So if you can get the perfected, we want that ideally. If you can't get the perfected, running a non-perfected is fine because the group passive will still be the same for the resource management. So aim for perfected. If you can't, non-perfected is fine. It's not like the Black Rose Resto where it has to be that one thing. Powered for the resto stuff. Back bar would be where your pillagers is. Again, you would run infused with a crushing enchant. If crushing is well taken care of by the other supports in group, you can run a weapon damage enchant. It will boost your healing as well as your damage. So if you have that well taken care of, you can run the berserk enchant instead. For my front bar, I normally run a weakening enchant to give a little bit of reduction on the weapon and spell damage from the target. For my body pieces, they are all divine, max mag. I have it paired right now with Bloodspawn. Bloodspawn is an ult set. Gives you the chance of getting ultimate back every time you take damage with a really low cooldown. So as a flex, if I'm being told by the group that I don't have any set pieces that I need to wear, I don't have to put on Spalder, I don't need to run Symphony. If they're just like, wear whatever you want, just make sure you're putting out a high amount of ultimate, I'll put on Bloodspawn. Other people choose to run the pearls, the pearl neck. I don't like to run the pearl neck because I don't play under 30% mag. I don't aim to be under 30% mag. I don't get the benefits of this set because that is not how I play. Some people have trained on it, some people really prefer it, some people do really well with it, and you know, more power to you if that's the way that you like to play, if you can manage it. It's great for your ult gen, but I just do not play under 30% mag, and I'm not going to, because I need to make sure that I have my resources for when shit goes down. So those are your two options if you've been told that you can do whatever you want to make sure that you have extra ult regen. For our jewels, I run infused or swift. Depending on what I'm doing and what the content is, I can add 1 to 3 pieces of swift and just completely get rid of my infused depending. It's a minimal difference between infused and arcane, but I do prefer the little bit of extra boost that you get from infused versus arcane, so infused or swift is what I run for my traits. Normally I do 1 Magri Cov glyph, and then my rings I do spell damage, but for the sake of the parse to show you the rotation, I just did all Magri Cov so I don't mag out while I'm trying to show you what to do here. If you find that you're having to heavy attack because you're running spell damage glyphs, there's no shame in swapping out and putting on a couple extra recov glyphs instead of the spell damage. If you're having to weave in heavy attacks or you're just flat out magging out because you have spell damage glyphs on, there is no shame in swapping over to extra recovs. It is a much larger problem for you to be magging out or heavy attacking repeatedly versus having a couple of extra mag recov glyphs on as a healer. So just do what you need to do to make sure that those hots are continuously pumping out uninterrupted. Normally you're going to be asked to run Spalder. You're going to find yourself as the group healer most of the time as a blade. If there's a situation where one of the healers has to kite out, it's normally going to be the warden, because the warden's skills are built to still be able to be properly played out in range. So you're oftentimes going to be asked to run Spalder as the group healer, so just make sure that you have that prepared. If I'm not running Spalder and I have the choice of running my own monster pieces, those monster pieces are generally going to be medium. That way I can take advantage of the crit passives on that weight. For my attributes, they're all in mag. And then for my Mundus, it's going to be either the Atronach or the Ritual. I normally don't have issues with resource management on my blade, so I will run the Ritual, which gives us extra healing output. Again, if you're finding that you're heavy attacking or you're just flat out magging out, there is no shame in running the Atronach. It is a much larger problem if you're laying down heavy attacks or just flat out running out of resources and not casting your skills versus having the Atronach on and not getting the benefit of the extra healing from Ritual. So Atronach or Ritual, just depending. For our skills, as a blade, your #1 job is making sure that everybody has their savagery proc. If you're the only blading group, you're the only source giving this passive out, and it benefits the entire group, so this is your #1 priority. The odd thing about savagery versus your other classes' passives, your group passives, is that you don't have to put a skill out in order to proc this. It just there needs to be an assassination skill on your bar, and then anything that goes out that does crit damage while you're on that bar procs the savagery. So normally what I do is I just run in cap. That way I don't have to take up a space on my bars with an actual ability skill in order to get the benefit of savagery. So for anybody that doesn't know, when you hit the target and it pops up yellow with the exclamation point, that is crit damage, which can be done with just the light attack. So like, that's crit, that's not crit. And then you'll notice on the far right, that skill that just went back up to 19 seconds is my savagery proc. Every single time I light attack with a crit on the bar that has in cap is putting out a savagery refresh. So something to keep in mind. Our other skills, Lotus Fan is a really nice skill for add pools. It gives minor vulnerability, which is the same skill that Bugs puts out. It's the same debuff that Bugs puts out. The only difference though, Bugs from a Warden only affects one target at a time. So when we're in mobs or trash pools or add pools, in order for each target to get the minor vuln, the Warden has to apply Bugs to each one of those targets. Lotus Fan is exactly that. It's a fan effect. So when you hit a target with Lotus Fan, that initial one that takes the magic damage gets minor vuln, and then anything that's surrounding it, if it's a nice cluster or stack, anything that's around it also gets affected with the minor vuln as it ripples out. So normally we have the Blade Healer in my group run Lotus Fan for the ad pulls. You will not run this in the boss fights though. The problem with Lotus Fan is it teleports your tune to the target. So I'm right on top of the target now. If I do this in a boss fight, I can end myself directly in a large AoE. I can put myself next to the tank and take whatever heavy attack was just incoming on the tank. Any kind of damage at all. I can just find myself in a situation where I'm on the floor because I just tried to Lotus Fan. So we have the Warden continue running bugs for the boss fights, and this comes off of the Blade's bars for the boss fights. So that's it for this skill line. Make sure that you have all of your passives as well. For the Shadow, a pinnacle of the Nightblade's bars is Refreshing Path. This is a huge deal for a Blade support. It gives Major Expedition, Minor Endurance, and Minor Intellect, as well as a really good Frontal Conal Hot. Minor Intellect and Endurance also comes from the Warden's Enchanted Growth. So when it comes from the Blade and the Warden, it doesn't stack. It'll just guarantee a little bit better that everyone in group gets it, regardless of where they're standing in relation to the Blade and the Warden. The Blade is going to be your source of expedition in most occasions for the group. If needed, the off-tank, if the off-tank isn't the one providing rapids for the group, it's going to be asked to come from the Blade a lot of times. The difference between rapids and Refreshing Path is that rapids gives minor and major versus only major. So there's going to be times too, since the Blade has more flex space than the Warden does, there may be times where the Blade is asked to run rapids as well, but just know that anybody that's in the path is going to get Major Expedition from you. So if you're doing something like running up the stairs on Zelvaka, make sure you're behind the group and hitting everybody with Expedition so they can get to the stairs. Another skill used is Mass Hysteria. I'm not a very big fan of this skill because I don't like the radius on it. It's a 6-meter radius, which isn't a lot of real estate in order to make sure that you hit everything. If you can see where the red goes, is the entire radius of the skill. So I can hit, if you look, I'm hitting RB. There's no timer that's popping up right now. It's because I'm not hitting anything with the debuff. So you have to get right on the target. You can see now that the countdown is happening, that means I've actually affected it, and then you can see underneath of the skeleton there's a debuff counting down. So that's how you can tell if you're trying to mess with this skill, if it's actually being put out or not. Pay attention to whether or not that timer is going off. But really tiny radius. I'll deal with having this in ad pulls, because if I Lotus Fan something and we've got that big cluster, I can Lotus Fan and then I can hit Mass Hysteria and everything gets the cowardice, but I don't really mess with it in the boss fights. For most boss fights, I'm standing behind the group, I'm putting out combat prayers, I'm putting out the hots, I'm making sure everything is being properly buffed and debuffed, and I am not in range. I would have to come in, hit the target, and then back up again, and I'm just not going to do that for cowardice. The other thing that makes me not so concerned about this skill, it reduces the weapon and the spell damage by 430, but the way that I have my group comped out is for my supports, we have it delegated between everybody to either proc Weakening or Crushing, and Weakening does that same debuff for slightly less, so it does 348. It's relatively the same kind of debuff, so technically still have something similar to it in group, so I'm just generally not concerned about Mass Hysteria. Refreshing Path though, big deal. Make sure that you have all of your passives from this skill line. And then moving on to Siphoning. Catalyst is a big deal on Blade. This is why we have the ult gen sets on the Blade, is for this passive right here. You need to make sure that you have a skill on this bar slotted, otherwise you will not reap the benefits of this passive. Normally that skill is going to be Healthy Offering. This is the Breath of Life version of a Blade right here. It's going to be your targeted burst heal If you are healing cages for ice in Sunspire, or your tank does a slinky with his health bar if he's learning what he needs to do, Healthy Offering is going to be your Breath of Life on the blade. So this is generally what's run. You could maybe run Debilitate as the other option. It's a really good skill to run on a DPS. It's not really a healer skill, but it does give Minor Magicka Steal. Not really a thing we've had to worry about for the last year or so, but it's there as an option if you just really didn't want to run Healthy Offering for whatever reason. For our Destro skills, we have Elemental Blockade. Sus is going to be something that you would use if the targets are not being affected by the group stack, like if it's something that's off in an area that's not being concentrated, like Nereds and Dreadsails, or the Creeper Orbs in Cloud Rest, something that needs to have Breach applied and the status effects to make sure that the burn is being pushed, is generally going to be delegated to one of the healers. In Cloud Rest, it would be delegated to the Warden, because the Warden is typically the kiter, but for Dreadsails, might be you. And then make sure that you have the passives. For the resto stuff, your standard, your stock options, Illustrious Healing. I am seeing some healers running Healing Springs lately. The difference between the two, Healing Springs gives you a resource regen when a target is affected by Healing Springs. It is a selfish regen. It doesn't apply to the group. And then Illustrious Healing has a longer uptime. I would prefer to have the longer uptime. I don't really have resource issues to the point where I would need to change it, and I really don't like to recast my HOTS, my stationary HOTS like that, until I really need to. If I need to replace it, or if it's about to time out, sure, but I'm not going to opt to have a lower uptime just so I can have recov that I don't really need. Regen is, everybody knows what regen is. Combat Prayer. And then Healing Ward is going to be there for, like, healing cages. And then make sure that you have your passives. Light and medium armor passives, besides improved sneak. Dexterity is what you need to focus on, which is why we would run two-piece medium when we have the option on our monsters, so that we can have that extra crit damage chance, so that we can better proc our savagery. Fighters Guild, we have a flex skill in here, Ring of Preservation. This would be something that you could use on 3rd floor on Fallgraven. It provides minor protection, as well as the endurance just the endurance, which is going to come from your passives anyway on the Blade and the Warden. But the minor protection is nice, plus it's a little hot. So if you're in a situation where the group is concentrated and they can all fit in this ring, it is a really nice extra little boost just to have that protection going. So flex skill there. Undaunted, make sure that you have your passives. You need your energy orb and your overflowing altar. Another flex skill to run would be Bone Surge. When somebody picks up the synergy, which is a really tiny radius again, so it's going to be something that's very niche, where everybody's concentrated and they can take advantage of grabbing this synergy at really close range. It provides an extra shield, and then for the Alkosh wearer, if they pick it up, it would be an extra synergy for them to proc their set. So this would be a flex. In our Assault, we have our Aggressive Horn, our Echoing Vigor, our Charging Maneuver would be a flex, and then our Continuous Attack. Support, Barrier, Mystic Guard, and then our Magicka Aid passive. We're not really going to run Barrier because we need to have room for Incap and Warhorn. So this would really be like if your raid lead says to proc Pillager with Barrier and just not to be in the Horn rotation, you could do this to take advantage of your Magicka Aid passive as well, but you would probably run the other morph. The Replenishing Barrier gives you ult gen when the shield starts falling off of targets that were affected, so you can give yourself a real fat boost when the Replenishing Barrier starts falling off. Reviving gives a hot when it starts falling off. Not really something that I need. If I've got people that are around me, they're well concentrated in the hots between me and my co-healer anyway, so just deal with take the replenishing, take the ult gen, especially since that's your job, is to have high ults. And then if a target needs to be guarded, it's probably going to be your job versus the other healer since you have more flex space. Wardens don't really have flex space without sacrificing something. So that's probably going to be your job if it's called for. Racial passives, and then make sure that you have the medicinal use passive in your alchemy. For our champion points, blue, we have our fighting finesse, gives us the extra crit on the damage and healing, so the crit to try to proc our savagery again. Between you and the other healer, you are going to coordinate. One of you is going to run Enlivening Overflow, the other one is going to run Hope Infusion. Normally we have Hope Infusion on the blade in our group, but for the sake of the parse, I'm going to run Enlivening Overflow because Hope Infusion won't give me any benefit on the parse. I'm not going to dip below 50% health, so I'm not going to get the proc. I would rather have the resource regen coming from Enlivening Overflow for this parse. Now, it's not set in stone. It's not like the blade healer has to run Hope Infusion and the warden has to run Enlivening Overflow. Enlivening Overflow is the more important of those two passives. So if you're constantly in group and the warden healer is constantly out of group, you would have the warden healer run Hope Infusion and you would run Enlivening, so you can guarantee better uptimes on it. If the other healer is constantly dying, if the other healer has really bad uptimes, if the other healer is just out of stack, like I said, have them run Hope Infusion. The one that's constantly in group runs Enlivening. Our other staple is Soothing Tide. Most of the hots that come out of a Nightblade are area of effect. So you'll have Soothing Tide, and then Swift Renewal for healing over time. That would be like your Radiating Regen, and your Vigor. If there's a flex that I need to put in, Swift Renewal is my flex CP in blue. So if I'm doing something where I need to have a little bit extra resistances, if I'm taunting the mages on Reef Guardian and Dreadsail's hard mode, I'm going to be out of stack a lot, and I'm going to be weaving in and out of the other healing done, so I might need to give myself a little bit of extra resistances. These are your three options for extra mitigation. There's an area of effect, there's a single target, and there's a damage over time mitigation. So you would, depending on the content, pick which one you need, which type of damage you need to have mitigated, and you would swap that out for Swift Renewal. However, these are not stock options. These will never just go on your bars just for niche situations. Otherwise, keep Swift Renewal on your bars. For your red, Boundless Vitality, Fortified, and Rejuvenation, your two flexes are Celerity and Bastion, typically. I like to be able to zoom around, get to where I need to be faster, so Celerity is my go-to, but if you're in a situation where you are barrier on cooldown, just secure the bag kind of trifecta thing, or your group is just constantly putting out wards, Bastion is obviously going to have a benefit. So those are your two to flex out for red. I'm gonna crash. Oh my god, every time I've tried to do this. Be right back. This is my third time trying to clip this without crashing coming out of my CP. We're just gonna give up. Gonna give up on it. Alright, I think we have covered everything. So going into the rotation. Oh, food, real quickly. Food should always be by stat, max health, max mag. For the sake of the parse, I'm gonna run Clockwork Citrus just so I don't have to mag out and deal with that going through it. But if you look at the max health 3326 versus 5395, you're going to die more often running Clockwork Citrus. So unless you're in a niche situation where the health isn't really as big of a deal, you could run Clockwork Citrus if you just find yourself having huge resource issues, but try not to. Try to get used to running Bystat before you do that. And then for our pots, Spell Power Pots is your default. If you are running Igneous in group, you can run your Heroism Pots for your extra mag recov, or you can do Tri-Stats. And then for our rotation, as stated before, Combat Prayer is your #1 priority. If you have a Resto staff on your bar, your job is to Combat Prayer. It's incredibly important for the group to get their Miners, their Berserk, and their Resolve. And then this is like one of the best burst heals that you have. So if, like, when in doubt, Combat Prayer. If you don't know what else to do, if you've got all of your buffs and debuffs and everything else ticking, just throw out some more Combat Prayers. The obnoxious thing about this skill is that it is not a smart proc, which means if I stand here and I've got the 11 other players in front of me and I'm just hitting Combat Prayer over and over again, even though there's 11 people in front of me, I could be hitting the same 6 people every time. So you need to move around a bit to try to make sure that you're blanket covering more people. And don't assume that your co-healer is covering everybody. Hit the skill as if you're the only person putting it out. Just make sure that everybody is as covered as absolutely possible. So normally I'll do like a right and a left shift before I go on about my business. It's going to be the first skill that you put out on your Resto skill. It's going to be the last skill that you put out before you leave your Resto bar. So my staples are Combat Prayer, Illustrious Healing, and Regen. My flex skills are Lotus Fan and Ring of Preservation, or Mass Hysteria is what I had there before. Like I said before, with the Potion Pop passive, you cannot get the benefits of the Potion passive unless you have one of these skills on your bar. So I'll put Healthy Offering on either Mass Hysteria or Lotus Fan to make sure that I get the benefit of Potion passive. I'm not going to do that for the Parse though, just so I can put out a little bit of extra damage and actually do something to this dummy instead of just stare at it. So those are our 2 flexes, and then our in cap. Back bar is Vigor, Path, Wall, Energy Orb, and Blood Altar, and then Horn. None of these skills are flex skills, really. So if you needed to like run Guard, I would take off Blood Altar and put it on my front bar so that I could have room for Guard on both of my bars. Getting into the rotation, with Lotus Fan in the ad pools, you'll notice that you have like a stick as soon as you put the skill out. So just don't try to bar swap as soon as you've put out Lotus Fan. You have a ton of skills on your bar that you can lay down as pre-buffs for a blade. So I'll just get right into it. As soon as we start, I will hit Rapid Regen 4 times so that the entire group starts out with the SPC proc. The blue that just went back up to 4 is Major Courage, and then my hands are purple, which is an indication that Spell Power Cure is procced. So I'll hit it 4 times to make sure everybody gets it. Combat Prayer, and then I'll lay down all of my other pre-buff hots that don't actually start the fight and get into it. I don't know if I stated when I was going through it, but Vigor only affects 6 people at a time, so when you hit Vigor, you need to hit it twice to make sure the entire group is affected by it. And then you'll notice I am not putting out Rapid Regen as part of my rotation. As long as the group is concentrated and in the hots, it's not really necessary. When people start moving out of the hots, or they're out of stack, I'll put out regen to make sure they have a little bit of cushion before they get back into And I hit mass hysteria and I was too far out, so it didn't get applied on that. That is about the gist of it. If there's anything that I missed, feel free to ask any questions.